Welcome to part 2 of my complete Imani guide. In the first part, I talked about the basics of Imani's kit. In this part, I'll be talking about her talents, loadout cards, and items from the store. Let's continue. Now that we have the basics out of the way, let's talk about Imani's talents. Starting with Imani's first talent, Splitting Ice. Frostbolt chains to a nearby enemy within 30 units, dealing 225 damage. In my opinion, this is Imani's best talent for general use. Whether you're an avid stance swap user or partial to the ice stance, the benefit is always there. It's free extra damage. This talent is so versatile and allows for some really cheeky Imani play. One of my favorite features of this talent is that it procs on most deployables. Ying illusions, barracks turrets, grok totems, etc. If you hit one of those, you can bounce to a nearby enemy. Or you could hit the target and damage the deployable at the same time. Another cool tactic with Splitting Ice is hitting enemies behind cover if their teammate is exposed. This is especially useful if the main target is a retreating support, for example. Overall, Splitting Ice, very useful and very consistent. Next is my most played talent, Mana Rift. Remaining still for 1 second creates a mana rift around you that generates mana every 1 second. Leaving the mana rift destroys it. A few little details about this talent. This talent generates about 20% of the mana bar per second. Mana Rift technically applies a 2-second buff to Imani's mana gain. Of course, if you stay in the Rift, the 2-second buff is constantly refreshed, but you can leave the Mana Rift and still generate some mana for those 2 seconds. You can also re-enter the Rift in that time frame to keep it active and continue gaining mana. On top of all of this, the Mana Rift is actually pretty sizable. Once generated, you do have some leeway to move around without destroying the Rift. Standing still in combat for a whole second is super risky in an FPS game, but you can play around this by abusing the Mana Rift's large radius. Look to generate the Mana Rift from around corners and peek cover once it's up. A lot of people think this talent is useless, but I wholeheartedly disagree. To an extent. Imani's double fireball is her best burst combo, and actually one of the highest damaging burst combos in the game. 2000 damage in half a second. If you are playing Fire Stance with any other talent, you will feel the slow generation of mana in the stance. Mana Rift somewhat alleviates this by allowing you to generate mana out of combat, and more mana in combat. If you prefer Ice Stance or Stance swapping, then I advise against this talent. The mana generation on Ice Stance is quick enough on its own. But, if you enjoy playing Fire Stance like me, I highly suggest giving Mana Rift a go. Just be careful when using your ultimate, as this talent gives away your position.
An opportunity.
You're the last who can control dragons. If you are to turn on the Paladins, no one could stand in your way.
And last of the 3 talents is Pyromania. Each of your Pyroballs explode in a 20 unit radius area on hit, but the damage of Pyreball when fully charged is reduced to 800. I put this talent last because I honestly cannot justify a use for it. Having all your shots explode now is great, but that reduced damage really hurts. Where Splitting Ice keeps your direct damage and only reduces the extra bounce damage, Pyromania will reduce all of your fireball damage by 20%, even the direct hits. This 20% damage nerf is really noticeable against Imani's biggest counters like dive tanks and flankers. Without this talent, 2 fireballs will deal 2000 damage, which can kill a good chunk of flankers. With Pyromania, those 2 fireballs go down to 1600 damage, meaning you now need a 3rd fireball on that flanker to kill them. A 3rd fireball that takes 1.2 seconds to fully charge. That extra second could be all the time that the flanker needs to finish you off. On top of that, remember how I mentioned that mana gain is based on damage? Normally it takes 8 fireballs to fill the mana bar, but with Pyromania, it takes 10 direct hits to fill the bar. The only use I see for this talent is fighting grouped up enemies or teams who like to constantly take cover. But even then, I think Splitting Ice does that job better. and the Fireburst combo from Mana Rift is too good to ditch for this situational talent. There are a few loadouts that work well with this talent, but I'll bring that up in the loadout section. To wrap up the talent section, I will go over which talents should be used for certain playstyles. If you prefer playing in Fire Stance, both Pyromania and Mana Rift will work, though I prefer the latter. For Ice Stance, of course Splitting Ice should be your go-to. And even though none of Imani's talents directly benefit stance swapping, I think Splitting Ice is her best talent for a stance swapping player. The bounce shots are just too good to pass up. Unlike Imani's talents, a lot of Imani's cards grant benefits to a stance swapping playstyle. This tier list will be based around that playstyle, but I will be stating if the card is valuable for a solo stance player. Just as a disclaimer, that you don't have to take this tier list as the end-all be-all. Don't let me stop you from using your favorite cards and being creative. Here it is. We know our ABCs, am I right? We'll start at the bottom and then work our way up. I said at the start of the video that Imani has weak self-sustain cards, and the F tiers prove that. What I believe to be Imani's worst card is Elemental Grace. Gain a 100 health shield per level for 3 seconds after dropping 2 or below 50% health. I know a lot of characters have cards like these, but I've never been a fan. Elemental Grace can be used as a weak filler card, or can take a lot of loadout points to be semi-useful. Even then, this card has a long 30-second internal cooldown. Imani's survivability is on the low side, but this isn't the way to alleviate that. The only other card in F tier is Elemental Barrier. Heal for 50 per level after using Elemental Shift. The scaling on this is low, and using this for consistent heal can be awkward. In this clip here, you can see the enemy Imani try to sustain herself with the card, but I'm able to chip away at her, even with my wonky aim. This card can be an option for a stance swapping build, but I think it's better to gloss over this one. Now in C tier, the common theme is mana generation. I think these cards are subpar because of Ice Stance's decent mana gain, and Mana Rift as a whole. The only time I suggest running some of these cards is if you're playing with Pyromania, since your mana generation will be super low. Starting at the bottom of C tier is Arcane Ice. Increase the mana generation of Frostbomb by 15% per level. As stated earlier, the mana generation on Frostbolts is fine, and this card is unnecessary. When capped out, you can hit an enemy with a full damage Frostbomb and just barely get over half of your mana. I expect better than that for a fully leveled card. Well, slightly better is the Arcane Flame card. Increase your mana generation of Inferno Cannon by 15%. When capped out, you can fill most of your mana bar if you manage to kill one full HP target. Though, I don't see a use for this outside of playing with Pyromania. And at the top of C tier, Mystic Fire. Regenerate 5% mana per level every 1 second when using Frostfire Glide. Capped out, this card will grant you full mana throughout the 4-second duration of Frostfire Glide. Again, like the other two cards, I think mana generation is fine for the most part, however this is a very fun card to use with Pyromania. Now we're getting to the middle tier. That's B tier, Baldy. Starting us off is Permafrost. Increase the projectile speed of Frostbomb by 6% per level. I was debating on putting this card lower because it's not too noticeable unless capped out. However, when capped out, you can go for some long-range bombs that aren't possible at base. Just be careful if you like using your bombs defensively. The faster speed can throw off your timing and can make you more prone to miss a shot. I recommend this card if you prefer the Ice Stance, otherwise I wouldn't bother. Next up is Swiftseer. Increase your movement speed while casting Inferno Cannon by 20% per level. First, I want to clear up some misinformation I see about this card. People on social media say that this card doesn't work in the air. That's false. On the ground and in the air, the card works as intended. Anyways, the wording on it is a little deceptive, so I'm going to try and simplify it. When Imani released, she was stuck in place when using the Inferno Cannon. The old Swiftseer card would grant 20% of her move speed back per level, granting her normal walk speed when capped out. Then in one of the patches, they buff Inferno Cannon to be the same speed as Swiftseer 3, which increased Imani's move speed by 60% or made Imani move 40% slower while casting. In the patch notes, it states that the new Swiftseer when capped out will grant Imani a bonus 20% move speed when in the cannon. So if we do our math from moving 40% slower at base to 20% faster when capped out, we can calculate that the Swiftseer card grants Imani about 12% move speed per level. So at level 1, Imani will move 28% slower while casting, at level 2, 16% slower, level 3, 4% slower, level 4, she will move 8% faster, and then finally at level 5, she will be moving 20% faster. Got it? Good. Don't bother capping out this card, and don't use this card unless you're solely sticking to fire. Because of its short duration, you should only be using the Inferno Cannon when you are in a position where your move speed doesn't matter. If you're at a point where you drastically need to move, it's probably best to cancel the ability. Swiftseer is a nice filler card, but I would advise against leveling it higher than a level 2. If you're worried about Inferno Cannon's self-slow at base, do note that you can use Nimble 3 to offset about half of it. Let's continue with the Pilgrimage card. Increase the duration of Frostfire Glide by 0.5 seconds per level. Not that this card is bad, I just think it's unnecessary. Frostfire Glide already lasts for 4 seconds at base. In most cases, that's more than enough time to get to where you need to be. Like Swiftseer, I do think this is a nice filler card. That extra half a second has saved my life on a few occasions. Ice in Her Veins is a card I took a recent liking to. Heal for 50 per level every second while using Frostfire Glide. This is all personal preference, but I don't notice healing unless it's 150 or over. So I would recommend running this card at a level 3 minimum. In my opinion, this is Imani's only viable self-sustained card. Capped out, it's 250 heals a second, which is higher than a Genos heal. Even though I run the card at a 3, the bonus healing has saved my butt so many times. Since Frostfire Glide is a predictable movement ability, having the self-healing as a buffer aids a lot in your escape. You can also self-heal with this card by using the Frostfire Glide on a wall if your healer isn't available. On top of all this, the card scales well with the aforementioned Pilgrimage card for even more healing. This is a really good card to use if you are sticking to one stance, since Imani doesn't have many cards that benefit that playstyle. Wrapping up B tier is Ancient Duty. Increase your maximum health by 50 per level. I actually run this card capped out in my main build. Extra health is always great, but it's even better on a character with weak self-sustain. Having 2450 HP does change a few breakpoints in duels. A notable example being in the duel against Strix, who does 2400 damage with 2 shots, and now has to commit an extra shot to kill Imani. Also with 2450 HP, you can survive a Genos ultimate, which helps a lot when you're sitting still during Dragon's Call. Starting us off in A tier is Pyretic Momentum. Frostfire Glide travels 5% faster per level. I have to admit, this card has spoiled me. So much so to the fact that I struggled to play Imani if this card isn't at least a level 3 in my deck. A fun fact with this card is that when it's capped out, you move almost as fast as a mount. Very worth it in my opinion. Now we start with the stance swapping cooldown reset cards. Here's Discipline. Elemental Shift reduces the cooldown of Frostfire Glide by 0.6 seconds per level. Capped out, that's 3 seconds or 25% off of your movement skill. This is the only loadout card Imani has that affects the cooldown of Frostfire Glide. I personally find the other A tier cards to be of higher value, but this is a great filler card for a stance swapper. Next, Draconic Will. Elemental Shift reduces the cooldown of Frostbomb and Inferno Cannon by 0.6 seconds per level. You are cutting the downtime on your 2 longest cooldowns at once. What's not to love? Highly suggest having this card in your stance swapping build. Let's move on to Heat Sink. Dealing damage with Pyreball reduces the cooldown of Frostbomb by 0.8 seconds per level. When capped out at a 4-second reduction, all you need to do is hit 4 fireballs to get your Frostbomb back. Fun fact with this card, your fireballs don't have to be fully charged to gain the benefit of the card, meaning you could quickly spit out some uncharged fireballs for quick Frostbomb when you need it. This card works pretty well with the Pyromania talent. The more forgiving shots on that talent makes it easier to proc this card. This card is a must for stance swapping players. And to wrap up the A tiers, we have Cooling Runes. Dealing damage with Frostbolt reduces the cooldown of Inferno Cannon by 0.5 seconds per level. The only reason I put this higher than Heatsink is because I think the Inferno Cannon is a better ability. However, both are amazing cards. When capped out and consistently hitting your shots, you can get the Inferno Cannon back in just under 3 seconds. Another must for stance swappers. To finish us off is the only card in S tier, Affinity. Reduce the cooldown of Elemental Shift by 1 second per level. 5 cards rely on Elemental Shift to be useful. Lowering that cooldown to 1 to 2 seconds makes a huge difference in those cards' viability. If you are planning on being any level of a stance swapper, then you need this card in your deck. No question about it. Before we wrap up this section, I would once again like to clarify that most of the cards in S and A tier are only useful when stance swapping. If you plan on sticking to one stance, look to prioritize cards from the bottom of A to the start of C tier. While Imani does have a lot of awesome stance swapping cards, I am saddened by the fact that she doesn't have a lot to benefit a solo stance playstyle. Now that we learned about Imani's cards, let's talk about some decks to utilize them with. I'll start with the deck for the 3 main playstyles, and then go into 3 gimmick decks. First is my stance swapping build, Hot and Cold. Affinity 4, Cooling Runes 4, Heat Sink 4, Draconic Will 2, and Discipline 1. This build is great for all-around stance swappers, as you will constantly be getting your secondary cooldowns reduced. The downside of this build is the lack of survivability cards like Pyretic Momentum and Ancient Duty. While you will be more lethal with this build, you are also more vulnerable. Classic Glass Cannon. Onto my Ice Stance build. Living in a world so cool. Permafrost 4, Ancient Duty 4, Pyretic Momentum 3, Ice Inner Veins 3, Pilgrimage 1. The notable card in this build is Permafrost 4. With this deck, I like to use the Frost Bomb at longer ranges to help my team secure kills. As mentioned earlier, Ancient Duty and Ice Inner Veins are great cards for a solo stance playstyle, since Imani's survivability is on the low side. Moving on to my preferred loadout for Fire Stance, Symmetra 4.0 is my main go-to build when I want to play some Imani. Ancient Duty 5, Pyretic Momentum 5, Ice Inner Veins 3, Swiftseer 1, Pilgrimage 1. Like the Ice Stance build, it looks really boring on paper, but having that extra survivability on Imani makes her a lot more reliable in my eyes. Pyretic Momentum at a 5 is so much fun to play with. Now we get onto the gimmicky decks. These first 2 are tweaked versions of my stance swapping build. The goal is to constantly spam your secondary ability. Let's start with my Frostbomb spam build, Frad Ice Cream. Heat Sink 5, Affinity 5, Draconic Will 3, Pyretic Momentum 1, Ancient Duty 1. With this loadout, you want to be using your Frost Bomb as often as possible. Once you throw it out, switch to Fire Stance, hit 4 fireballs, and toss out another bomb. Don't forget that you can use uncharged fireballs to refill the cooldown even faster. Then we got my Inferno Cannon spam build, Burnout Legend. Cooling Runes 5, Affinity 4, Discipline 4, Swiftseer 1, Draconic Will 1. Same deal as earlier, get that cooldown reset as fast as possible. Cutting the cooldown on Frostfire Glide is very useful for a combo with the Infernal Cannon, which we'll get to later. And last of my loadouts is my gimmicky deck to try to make Pyromania viable. This is Discount Mana Rift. Mystic Fire 5, Arcane Flame 4, Pyretic Momentum 3, Ice Inner Veins 2, Swiftseer 1. The main goal with this loadout is to recreate a pseudo Mana Rift playstyle. The main strategy I found with this is to use the Frostfire Glide on a wall, fill up my mana, shoot an instant fireball, pop Inferno Cannon, fill up the mana again, and shoot another instant fireball. Unfortunately, the downside of Pyromania is still too great for me to recommend this build legitimately, but it is a fun way to try and make the talent viable. All of these decks are available for you to import in-game. Just search my user YellowNinja's and you should be able to find them. Now we have the item tier list. This time I'll start at the top and work my way down. Cauterize is the single best item in Paladins. Healing in this game is so good, and enemy healing throws off the time to kill on all of Imani's basic attacks and combos. Negating a chunk of that healing helps to swing the scales back in Imani's favor. The only other item in S tier is Nimble. Yes, you get that base 21% bonus move speed, which is nice. But what sets this item over the edge for me is the fact that both the Frostfire Glide and the Inferno Cannon gain benefit from this item. 3 speed boosts for the price of 1, all of which boost your survivability tremendously. Definitely prioritize Nimble, after capping Cauterize. On to the A tiers. These are all around good items for Imani that you should consider taking once you have your S tiers capped out. Since Imani has low survivability, I prioritize running Haven or Blast Shields depending on what the enemy is running. Having 21% damage reduction is very helpful all around, but especially helpful in duels in the enemy's favor. Think of all the flankers who have to commit an extra shot or two to kill you now. And to wrap up A tier, we have Chronos. Besides Elemental Shift, all of Imani's cooldowns are over 12 seconds. With a 30% reduction, the cooldown on the Glide goes down to 8.4 seconds, and the cooldown on the secondary abilities goes down to 12.6 seconds. Getting 30% off on these cooldowns helps to reduce the downtime between Imani's ability combos. I personally don't use Chronos a lot as I've gotten used to Imani's cooldowns, but I highly suggest you do if you are trying out Imani for the first time, or just want to push her abilities to the max. Now onto the B tiers. I decided to put Rejuvenate at the top, since it's the most consistent healing item. If you have a good healer who keeps an eye on you, why not make their job a little easier? Rejuvenate helps to keep you in combat for longer and reduces the downtime when retreating for heals. I would prioritize other healing items if your support isn't tending to you often. Next is Life Rip and Kill to Heal. I personally prefer Life Rip as I find the healing to be more consistent, but it's all personal preference. With Life Rip 3, you will heal 123 per Frostbolt and 300 per fully charged Fireball. Both of these items should be your last priority, however, as they both get severely weakened by Cauterize. And last of the B tiers is Morale Boost. As I mentioned earlier, Imani's ultimate is inconsistent in its value. In some matches, I find myself barely using the dragon because there isn't a safe opportunity to do so. If you find your dragons getting big value, then get some morale boost. Up to you. Now I know a lot of people are going to be confused by the C tiers. I put all of these items so low as their usefulness is situational. If the enemy is consistently killing you with crowd control, get some resilience. Seriously. Imani's low health means she is an easy kill after a long stun or cripple. While helpful, I would assess if the enemy team is actually hitting their crowd control onto you first, before buying. A lot of crowd control in this game can be avoided or outplayed, so make that call in your games. And Wrecker. Honestly, the only time I recommend buying this is against those annoying infinite shield Fernandos. All the other shields in this game are time-based and will go down after a few seconds. Not to mention, a few of those shields are stationary. In general, I prefer to wait the shield out or to find a different angle to attack from. If you do need to buy Wrecker, prioritize taking the shield down in Ice Stance since it has a higher DPS. Master Riding is really a siege-specific useful item. Even then, Imani prefers playing in the backline. She shouldn't be the first to arrive at the capture zone. I mean, if you're dying a lot and need to get back in the fight faster, then get it. Though I just think Haven or Blast Shields are better, as they prevent you from dying in the first place. Next up, Illuminate. I mean, if a sky is really bothering you, then get it, but otherwise you don't need it, because you can actually track invisible targets with the Infernal Cannon, which we'll cover again in the advanced section. Last up in C tier is Bulldozer, which in my eyes is only really necessary against the Nara, and even then, you should try to avoid playing in her range to begin with. Oh, how could I forget Sim tier with its lone item? Veteran! Even if you don't have a healer, avoid this garbage. That wraps up part 2. In the next part, I'll be covering the advanced ability combos and strategies, as well as talking about Imani's counters and team synergies. I hope you all enjoyed this part, and I look forward to seeing you in the next one. I'm YellowNinja, and peace.